In the spring of 1926, a 60-year-old Russian biologist stepped off a steamship in West Africa, carrying a leather case of glass syringes, a stack of Soviet rubles, and a letter from the Kremlin authorizing him to do something no scientist had ever attempted. His name was Ilya Ivanov, and he had come to French Guinea to impregnate chimpanzees with human sperm. The project was funded, signed off, and protected by some of the most powerful men in the Soviet Union. And for a few strange years, the Bolsheviks genuinely believed Ivanov was going to hand them a new kind of human being. Long before any of the ape business, Ilya Ivanov was already a household name in Russian science. He'd spent the early 1900s perfecting artificial insemination in horses, and his methods were so efficient that a single prize stallion could now father 500 foals a season instead of 20. That alone made him useful. But what made him famous were the hybrids. He crossed zebras with donkeys to zebra's, mixed European bison with cattle to produce massive zubrons, and bred mice with rats, just to see if he could. By the time the Bolsheviks took power in 1917, Ivanov was the Soviet Union's go-to man for any animal experiment that sounded impossible. The new government, desperate for scientific prestige, handed him laboratories, staff, and a near-blank check. And around 1924, Ivanov started writing letters about a much bigger idea. He wanted to try the same hybridization techniques on the closest relatives of humans: chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. In September 1925, his proposal landed on the desk of the Soviet Council of People's Commissars. Within weeks, they approved $10,000 in gold-backed currency to fund the expedition. That's roughly $200,000 today. The reasoning wasn't just scientific curiosity. The Bolsheviks had a problem. They'd outlawed religion, declared God dead, and now needed proof to back it up. A living human-ape hybrid would be a walking sermon against the Book of Genesis. There was also a darker reason floating through party meetings. A creature with human intelligence and ape strength would make an ideal worker, tireless in the mines, fearless in the trenches, and unable to organize a strike. Ivanov didn't have to sell them on any of that. He just had to deliver. So, in early 1926, he boarded a train to Paris, picked up letters of introduction from the Pasteur Institute, and sailed south for the French colony of Guinea. His destination was a research station called Kindia, tucked into the hills about 100 kilometers inland from the port of Conakry. The French had set it up to study tropical diseases and kept a small population of chimpanzees on site for vaccine work. When he arrived in March 1926, he was disappointed. The chimps at Kindia were too young, most of them not yet sexually mature. He spent months waiting and arranging for adult animals to be captured from the surrounding forest. By February 1927, he was ready. Local hunters dragged in 3 adult female chimpanzees named Babette, Civet, and Black. They were tied down on wooden tables while Ivanov and his son injected them with human sperm using long brass syringes. The donor's identity was never officially recorded. The diaries hint it was a local African man, possibly more than one, recruited without being told what the sample was actually for. Weeks passed. None of the 3 females became pregnant. Ivanov tried again with a 4th chimp. Nothing. He started to suspect the problem was timing, that he didn't understand the chimpanzee ovulation cycle well enough to catch the right window. By the summer of 1927, his funding was running out, his chimpanzees were dying from tropical illness, and the French colonial authorities were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about what exactly he was doing out there. Ivanov came home to Moscow in July 1927 with no hybrid, no pregnancy, and a budget in the red. Instead of admitting failure, he pitched the Soviet Academy on something even more aggressive. He wanted to flip the experiment. His new plan was to inseminate human women with sperm from male apes. He'd already started building a primate nursery in the subtropical Soviet Republic of Abkhazia, in a town called Sukhumi on the Black Sea coast. He acquired an orangutan named Tarzan, an aging male orangutan he intended to use as the father. And then he placed a quiet advertisement, through party channels, asking for Soviet women willing to volunteer as mothers. Astonishingly, he got responses. At least 5 women wrote in, some of them genuine, ideological true believers who saw it as a service to science and the revolution. One letter from a woman, identified only as G, read, "My life will have no further interest for me. I ask you not to refuse me." She was accepted. He set the experiment for the summer of 1929. And then Tarzan, the orangutan, had a brain hemorrhage, and died before anything could happen. Ivanov scrambled to import new apes, but by then the political climate around him was changing fast, and the men who'd signed off on his funding were starting to lose their own positions. In December 1930, the secret police came for Ivanov. He was 63 years old, a celebrated academician, and they arrested him at his apartment in Moscow on charges of vaguely counter-revolutionary activity within the agricultural sciences. The charge was almost certainly a pretext. Stalin's purges of the scientific community were just beginning, and Ivanov's foreign connections and failed exotic projects made him an easy target. He was sentenced to 5 years exile in Alma-Ata in Soviet Kazakhstan. He was allowed to keep working, sort of. They put him at a veterinary institute studying livestock breeding, which for the man who'd once tried to engineer a new species was a quiet humiliation. In March 1932, while waiting at a train platform in Alma-Ata, he collapsed from a stroke. He died the next day. He was 65. His death was barely reported, and within a decade his name was almost entirely scrubbed from Soviet scientific literature. The Sukhumi primate station Ivanov founded kept running for decades after his death. It became one of the largest ape research facilities in the world, supplying animals for Soviet space program experiments and biological research. Rumors persisted for years that someone there continued his work in secret. Soviet defectors occasionally claimed to have seen hybrid creatures in cages, or paperwork referring to pregnancies that shouldn't have been possible. None of it was ever substantiated. What modern geneticists can say is that Ivanov's project was almost certainly doomed from the start. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Chimpanzees have 24. The numbers don't line up, and any embryo that did form would likely fail in the first weeks of development. Not impossible in some lab-engineered future, geneticists say, but absolutely impossible with a brass syringe and a tied-down chimp in 1927. Ivanov's papers were eventually declassified in the 1990s after the Soviet Union collapsed. Researchers found the diaries, the budget requests, and the letter from the woman called G. The full picture only came out 70 years after he died, alone, on a train platform in Kazakhstan.